My sister looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're not invited to Thanksgiving. We don't want grease-stained hands at our table." I laughed on the outside, but inside it felt like ice water had been poured down my spine. What she didn't know was that the same hands she mocked, the hands of an HVAC tech, were the very ones paying off her student loans in silence. This is the story of how being cast out of my own family's holiday revealed a truth none of them were ready to face. My name is Daniel, and I am telling you this story because sometimes silence becomes unbearable. For years, I kept my head down, fixed broken furnaces in the winter, crawled through hot attics in July, and believed hard work would speak louder than status. I was wrong. What happened to me this Thanksgiving changed the way I see family, loyalty, and what it means to be truly valued. It started with one sentence, spoken so casually that it almost felt rehearsed, but it cut through me sharper than any tool I ever held. "You're not invited this year," my sister Melissa said, standing in the doorway of my parents' house. "We don't want grease-stained hands at Thanksgiving dinner." She repeated it once more, slower, as if my hearing was broken, not her heart. "You're not invited." The words hung in the air like smoke I couldn't breathe. On the outside, I smiled, a tight, practiced smile, the kind you wear when a customer insists on something ridiculous and you have no choice but to nod. Inside, it was as if a bucket of ice water had been thrown at me. My stomach clenched, my throat burned, and for a split second, I wondered if I should laugh to make it easier on her. But no one laughed. My mother shifted her weight awkwardly, holding a dish towel like a shield. My father avoided my eyes, suddenly very interested in the thermostat on the wall, as if the temperature needed urgent adjusting. Melissa, though, stood tall, her manicure shining under the warm hallway light, her designer blouse tucked neatly into tailored pants. She looked at me like I was a stranger who had tracked mud onto a pristine white carpet. I leaned against the doorway, pretending I was unaffected, though my pulse was hammering in my ears. For a moment, I thought about all the times I had walked into homes just like this one, strangers' homes, where people greeted me with gratitude for fixing what they could not. And yet here, in my own family, I was the embarrassment. I wanted to ask her why. Why my work uniform, my calloused hands, or the smell of machine oil mattered more than the years we had spent together around the very same table. But I already knew the answer. To Melissa, appearances were everything. And to her, I was the wrong image to display. My mind replayed her words, each syllable striking me again and again. Not invited, grease-stained, not family. I clenched my hands inside my jacket pockets until my nails pressed half-moons into my skin. Outwardly, I gave a small shrug, as if it didn't matter, as if my entire sense of belonging hadn't just been stripped away. Melissa tilted her chin up, satisfied, like she had won some unspoken game. The silence in the room thickened. My mother glanced at me with a mix of guilt and resignation, but she said nothing. My father's throat cleared, but no words followed. They let her decision stand. And that was when something shifted inside me. I realized this wasn't just about Thanksgiving dinner. It was about every moment she had looked down on me for not wearing a suit, every time she rolled her eyes when I talked about repairing ductwork or calibrating thermostats, every sideways comment about working with your hands. But this time, the sting was sharper because it wasn't just casual dismissal. It was exile. "Fine," I said quietly. My voice didn't crack. My smile didn't falter. If anything, I sounded calm, maybe even bored, like her words hadn't found their mark. But inside, I was already unraveling and rebuilding at the same time. The unraveling came from the humiliation, the aching awareness that my own family didn't see me as worthy of sharing a meal. The rebuilding came from a strange, steady fire that grew in my chest, whispering that the truth would not stay buried much longer. I stepped back from the doorway, the autumn air brushing against my neck like a cold hand. I pictured the table without me, the golden turkey, the laughter, the wine glasses clinking, and my empty chair that nobody would mention. They would sit there, secure in their illusion of sophistication, convinced they had preserved their image by cutting me out. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that for the past 2 years, every month without fail, I had been making the payments on Melissa's student loans. Quietly, anonymously. Because when she graduated with her degree in marketing and the bills started piling up, She had cried about drowning in debt. She had cried to me. And I, the brother she now deemed unfit to share a meal, had taken that weight off her shoulders. I never asked for thanks. I never asked for recognition. I thought family meant helping even when nobody clapped for you. But standing there watching her lips curl into a dismissive smile, I realized that maybe silence had been my mistake. The truth, I knew, had a way of surfacing. I didn't plan to reveal it that night. Not yet. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. Because just hours later, Melissa would learn exactly who had been paying for her comfort. And when she did, the look on her face would be nothing like the smug satisfaction she wore in that doorway. That night, she believed she had shut me out. She didn't know she had just opened a door neither of us would ever be able to close again. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles lingered in the hallway even as I stepped back from the doorway, uninvited. It was the kind of scent that usually meant home, warmth, and family. This time, it felt like a cruel joke, a reminder that I was close enough to smell Thanksgiving, but not welcome to taste it. The light inside glowed golden across polished wood floors, across the laughter lines in my mother's face, across the silver bracelets on Melissa's wrist. But it did not reach me. I stood outside, jacket zipped, breath fogging in the November air, while my family pretended my absence was a natural part of the celebration. In my head, I replayed what I had expected this holiday to be. I thought I would arrive, put down a pumpkin pie I had bought from a local bakery after my last service call, and laugh at the way Dad always carved the turkey too thick. I thought we would argue over football on the TV, sip cider too sweet for its own good, and joke about how Mom still used the same tablecloth from 20 years ago. For a moment, I let myself sink into that dream of normalcy. I could almost hear the scrape of forks against plates, the pop of a champagne cork, the rise and fall of familiar voices. But the vision shattered the second Melissa's voice echoed in my head again. We don't want grease-stained hands at Thanksgiving dinner. The reality was not warm. It was cold, sharp, and humiliating. The signs had been there, though. Looking back, I could see them as clearly as the cracks in an old duct system. Melissa's eyes narrowing whenever I showed up in work boots, her fingers drumming impatiently whenever I mentioned how many hours I had logged that week, the way she insisted I use the side door once when she hosted a dinner party. All those tiny moments, like warning lights on a dashboard, had been blinking for years. I ignored them. I thought family was stronger than pride, that love was thicker than pretense. I was wrong. Inside, I caught a glimpse of my father as he passed the living room doorway. His tie was slightly crooked, his expression stiff. He had once told me he was proud that I chose a trade, proud that I could fix things most people would never understand. But lately, even he seemed to follow Melissa's lead, treating me like the relative best left in the shadows. My mother stood at the counter, smoothing a napkin again and again, as though the creases mattered more than my presence. She avoided my eyes because she knew if she met them, she would see the hurt she refused to name. And then there was Melissa, the star of her own stage. Her glass of wine tilted just so, her laughter sharp, her clothes crisp as if she had walked out of a glossy magazine spread. She looked at me with pity disguised as superiority, as though she had elevated herself beyond the reach of someone like me. Yet every time she flipped her hair, every time she adjusted her necklace, I remembered how different she had been the night she called me in tears about her student loans. That night she had not been powerful. She had been small, afraid, desperate, and I had been the one to catch her before she drowned. But that history was invisible in the glow of the dining room chandelier. To them, tonight was about appearance. Melissa wanted to host a flawless Thanksgiving without the stain of her brother who fixed furnaces and unclogged vents. I imagined the table where I was supposed to sit. I imagined the chair empty, my plate never filled, my voice never heard. And for the first time in years' time, I wondered if maybe that was exactly how they preferred it. Still, I forced a steady breath and leaned against the porch rail. The wood was cold beneath my palm. I could hear the faint clink of silverware inside, a muffled laugh, the hum of conversation that once included me. Each sound was another nail in the coffin of my expectation. This was not the family holiday I had pictured. This was exile wrapped in candlelight. And yet, in the pit of my stomach, there was no despair, only a growing calm. Because while they believed they had erased me from the picture, they had no idea how much of their comfort rested on my shoulders. The irony burned hotter than any furnace I had ever repaired. Melissa could host her perfect Thanksgiving, but she did so while dining on the security I had quietly provided. Without me, her carefully crafted image would crumble. I stayed a moment longer, letting the cold night air sting my cheeks, reminding myself I was still standing, still breathing, still more than what they reduced me to. Then I turned and walked away, the sound of laughter fading behind me. I told myself I would not think about it again, that I would bury the ache deep inside like I always did. But deep down, I knew the silence would not last. Because Thanksgiving was only the beginning, and before the weekend was over, Melissa would learn a truth that would shatter the illusion she had built, and she would never look at me the same way again. This wasn't the first time Melissa had drawn a line between us. Thanksgiving might have been the sharpest cut, but it was carved into a pattern that had started years earlier, each slice smaller, quieter, easier to ignore, until they weren't. I remember the first time I realized she didn't see me as an equal. I was 22, fresh out of my apprenticeship, proud of my certification, and eager to prove I could stand on my own. Melissa had just graduated college, wearing her cap and gown like armor. At the family party that night, an uncle asked what I was doing with my life. Before I could answer, she laughed and said, "Daniel works with ducks and dust. I'm the one with the degree." People chuckled politely. I smiled too, but inside it was like a crack in the foundation. Small, maybe invisible to everyone else, but I felt it. A couple of years later, the cracks widened. One summer, her air conditioner broke in the middle of a heat wave. She called me at 2 a.m, her voice sharp with panic. "It's unbearable in here, Daniel. You have to fix it now." I was exhausted from a 12-hour shift, but I drove across town with my tool bag anyway. I spent 4 hours crawling through her attic, sweat dripping into my eyes, fiberglass scratching my arms raw. When I finished, she didn't thank me. She didn't even offer me a glass of water. She just said, "Good, now I can sleep," and shut the door. I told myself she was just tired, but the truth was that was Melissa's way. She took, she expected, and she never gave back. Then came the time she mocked me in front of friends. We were at a birthday dinner for our cousin. Melissa showed up in a tailored dress, her hair perfectly styled, her heels clicking against the hardwood like she owned the room. I came straight from work, still in my boots, my shirt stained with grease. She looked me up and down and said loudly, "Don't sit too close, Daniel. You smell like someone's basement." The table laughed. I felt my face burn. I forced a grin, said something about hard work being honest work, but the sting stayed long after dessert was cleared. Still, I let it go. I always let it go. That was the role I had written for myself. The brother who shrugged, who didn't fight back, who carried burdens quietly. And maybe that would have been the end of it, just years of quiet digs and casual humiliation, if not for the loans. Melissa had taken out tens of thousands for her degree. At first, she tried to manage them, but after a year, she called me late one night, crying so hard I could barely understand her. "I can't keep up," she sobbed. "The interest, the payments, it's too much. I'll lose everything." Her voice was small, stripped of all the sharpness she usually wore. I heard fear, and for the first time in a long time, I heard the sister I used to protect when we were kids. Without thinking, I told her I would help. She resisted for about 30 seconds before letting me. That was how it started. Every month, without fail, I logged into that account and sent in the payment. At first, I told myself it was temporary, just until she got steady at work. But months turned into years. I skipped vacations, patched my old truck instead of replacing it, and worked double shifts when the weather spiked, all so she could walk through life without the weight of those bills crushing her. I never told anyone. Not my parents, not friends, not even Melissa, because I paid under an anonymous designation. I thought if she didn't know, she wouldn't feel ashamed. I thought silence was a gift. But silence, I learned, can be mistaken for weakness. While I was paying down her debt, she was cutting me out of her life piece by piece. One Christmas, she bought everyone in the family matching gifts and handed me a mug with the words, "World's okayest brother," scrawled across it. She grinned as if it was funny. My parents chuckled too. I laughed along, but that mug sat in the back of my cabinet for years, untouched, a quiet reminder of where I stood. There were dozens of little betrayals like that, each one stacking on top of the last. The time she made a toast at Thanksgiving about how she was the only one in the family who made it. The time she borrowed my truck for a weekend and returned it with an empty tank, mud caked into the floor mats. The time she told her friends I was just a handyman, as if that title erased the nights I drove through snowstorms to fix furnaces for families who couldn't survive the cold without them. By the time she banned me from Thanksgiving, I shouldn't have been surprised. Every memory lined up perfectly, each insult and dismissal pointing straight to that locked door and those cruel words. And yet, it still cut deeper than I expected. Maybe because Thanksgiving wasn't about her. It was supposed to be about family, about gathering around a table no matter what. To be told I didn't belong, that was more than rejection. That was erasure. But here's the truth Melissa didn't understand. My life had been built on hard work, sweat, and resilience. Every time she dismissed me, I carried on. Every time she belittled me, I turned the other cheek. And every time she needed saving, I showed up anyway. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know yet, was that the same hands she called grease-stained had been writing the checks that kept her world intact. Standing outside her perfect Thanksgiving, I realized something else. Every cut she made was also a debt, and sooner or later, all debts come due. 4. The next day began like any other, or at least that's what I told myself as I laced up my work boots and grabbed my tool bag. I drove out before sunrise, my truck rattling down familiar streets, the heater groaning against the November cold. My mind kept circling back to the night before, to the look on Melissa's face when she shut me out, to the silence of my parents who let her. I thought work would distract me. It usually did. But halfway through repairing a furnace in an old couple's basement, my phone buzzed with a string of messages. At first, I ignored them. Then I saw her name on the screen, Melissa. The first text was short, "Call me." The next was sharper, "We need to talk, now." Then came the one that made me pause, hands frozen over a set of wires. "Why is your name on my loan account?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The secret I had kept for years, the sacrifices I had buried in silence, had finally surfaced. I finished the repair with shaky hands, muttered to the homeowners that everything was working fine, and sat in my truck staring at the messages. My heart thudded heavy against my ribs. She knew. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to think, to plan, but Melissa was relentless. Call after call lit up my phone. Finally, I answered. Her voice came through sharp as glass. "Daniel, tell me the truth. Are you the one who's been paying my loans?" I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. "Yes," I said simply. Silence. For a long moment, the only sound was her breathing, ragged and uneven, like someone had punched the air out of her. Then she exploded. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you tell me?" Her tone was not gratitude. It was anger, confusion, maybe even shame. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the frost creeping along the windshield. "Because you asked for help, Melissa. You were drowning, and I could help, so I did. I didn't need you to know. I didn't want you to feel smaller because of me." Her laugh was bitter, jagged. "Smaller? You made me feel like a fool. All this time, I thought I was managing. I thought I had it under control, and now I find out my little brother, the HVAC Tech, is the one holding me up?" Her voice cracked on the last words, but the venom was still there. Something inside me snapped. "You shut me out of Thanksgiving because of my job? Because you thought I wasn't good enough to sit at the same table. And yet that same job has been paying off the debt that lets you walk around pretending you're better than me." The line went quiet again, but I could feel the weight of my words hanging between us. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost pleading. "Why didn't you just stop? Why keep doing it if you knew how I treated you?" I closed my eyes. Memories flashed. The night she cried to me like a child, the nights I skipped dinner to cover her payment, the mornings I went to work bone-tired, but still proud that at least she was safe. Because I thought family meant helping, no matter what. I thought one day you'd see me for who I really am, not for the dirt under my nails. That night, she showed up at my apartment. I heard the knock, hard and hurried, and when I opened the door, Melissa stood there, hair a mess, eyes red from crying. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Her voice trembled. "Is it true? Every single month that was you?" I nodded. She pressed a hand to her mouth, staggered back like the weight of it all finally landed. For once, Melissa didn't look polished or proud. She looked lost. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you keep giving to someone who treated you like you didn't matter?" I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. My voice was calm, steady, even though my chest felt tight. "Because I wanted you to have a chance. Because I thought if I carried the weight, maybe you'd fly. But last night showed me something, Melissa. You'd rather cut me out than admit what I've done, and that tells me more than I ever wanted to know." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't move to comfort her. She had made her choices. She had built her world on appearances, and now the foundation was cracking. She looked around my apartment, at the worn furniture, the secondhand table, the tools stacked neatly by the door. For the first time, she seemed to see the cost. The vacations I never took, the new truck I never bought, the life I put on hold so she could build hers. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm sorry." 2 words, shaky and small, but they didn't undo years of ridicule, didn't erase the sting of being unwanted at Thanksgiving. I nodded once, not out of forgiveness but acknowledgement. "You don't have to apologize to me," I said. "You need to look in the mirror and decide who you want to be. Because the person who shut her own brother out of her life, that's not someone I can keep saving." Melissa left that night without another word, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. I watched her go, the door closing softly behind her. For the first time in years, I felt light, as though laying down a burden I should never have carried alone. The truth was out, and while it broke her image, the fallout didn't wait long to arrive. By Saturday morning, my phone lit up again, this time with my parents' numbers flashing one after another. First mom, then dad, then both together. I let the calls go unanswered, thinking maybe I needed a little more time to breathe, but by mid-afternoon, there was a knock at my door that shook the frame. When I opened it, my parents stood there, coats buttoned tight against the cold, their faces carrying a mix of exhaustion and accusation. Melissa trailed behind them, eyes swollen from crying, lips pressed into a thin line. Dad stepped inside first without asking. He dropped an envelope on my kitchen table like it was evidence in a trial. "Is it true?" he demanded. "You've been paying her loans?" The weight of his voice filled the room. Mom looked at me with something between shock and pleading, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Melissa stood back, silent, like a child caught in the act but unwilling to confess. I nodded slowly. "It's true." The room went still. Dad's jaw clenched. "Why didn't you say anything? Why keep us all in the dark?" His voice carried more frustration than gratitude, as though my silence had offended him more than Melissa's dependence. I met his eyes. Because she asked for help. Because she was drowning. And because I thought if I said it out loud, you'd all look at her differently. My mother finally spoke, her voice soft, trembling. "Daniel, you should have told us. We could have figured something out together." I gave a hollow laugh. "Really? When she banned me from Thanksgiving, you both just stood there. You let her decide I wasn't worthy of the same table. Do you think I believed for 1 second you would have stood beside me if you knew?" Melissa finally found her voice, brittle and defensive. "I didn't mean it like that. I just wanted everything to be perfect. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Daniel. People expect a certain image." Her words struck me like ice. I shook my head slowly. "Perfect? You shut your brother out of the family to protect an image. Meanwhile, every bite of food you ate, every shopping spree you flaunted, every bill you ignored was covered by the very same hands you called grease-stained. Do you not see the hypocrisy?" Her face crumpled, but I didn't stop. "You humiliated me for years. You mocked me in front of family, in front of friends, and still I helped you because I thought one day you'd see me as more than just a trade uniform. But instead, you built yourself up by tearing me down. And last night, when you knocked on my door, I realized something. I've been carrying both of us, and it ends here." Dad tried to interject, his voice rising. "Don't talk like that. Family fights, but family forgives. You've done a noble thing, but throwing it in her face now isn't the answer." I turned to him, my patience fraying. "You want me to forgive? Then why didn't you defend me when she told me I wasn't invited? Why didn't either of you stand up when she spat those words in my face? Family forgives, yes, but family also protects. And you failed me when it mattered most. Mom's eyes welled with tears. Daniel, please, we didn't know what to say. We thought it would pass. I stared at her, my voice quiet but firm. Silence is not love. Silence is complicity, and I've lived my whole life carrying the weight of your silence. Melissa stepped forward then, voice cracking. I'll pay you back. Every cent. I'll find a way. I let out a slow breath, the anger in me cooling into something harder, sharper. It's not about the money, Melissa. It never was. It's about respect. And you can't buy that back with checks. You have to live it. For a moment, the room was heavy with all the things unsaid over the years. Dad finally sighed, rubbing his temples, his voice weary. So what happens now? I looked at each of them, the family I had sacrificed for, the family that had turned its back on me. Now, I stopped paying. I stopped fixing. I stopped carrying the burden that was never mine. If you want me at your table again, it won't be because you need what I can give. It will be because you finally see who I am. Melissa broke then, sobbing openly, her hands covering her face. Mom reached for her, guiding her toward the door. Dad lingered, his eyes on me, but he said nothing. The three of them left in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing down the hall. When the door closed, I sat at the table staring at the envelope Dad had left. Inside was a printout of Melissa's loan statements, each one stamped with payments I had made. Proof of years I could never get back. I folded the papers neatly and placed them back in the envelope. For the first time, I felt no shame, just clarity. The confrontation hadn't given me peace, not yet, but it had given me truth. And truth, no matter how messy, was better than silence. The cost of carrying Melissa had been steep, but the cost of losing myself would have been greater. From that day forward, I decided I would never again let their image dictate my worth. When the door shut behind my family that afternoon, the apartment fell into a silence so thick I could almost hear my heartbeat echoing off the walls. I sat at the table, staring at the envelope of loan statements, my name stamped over and over again where hers should have been. For years, I had believed those payments were proof of love, proof that no matter how badly Melissa treated me, I would always be the brother who came through. Now, I saw them differently. They were receipts of a lesson I had been too stubborn to learn. Sacrifice without respect only drains you, never builds you. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The air was cold, crisp, with a hint of frost on the window. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the neighborhood come to life. Cars rolled down the street, kids dragged sleds across the sidewalk, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of peace. The weight on my shoulders was lighter because I had finally set it down. I wasn't carrying Melissa anymore. I wasn't carrying the silence of my parents. I was carrying only myself, and that was enough. Later that week, Melissa tried to call again. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, her voice quiet, almost broken. Daniel, I don't know how to fix this. I know I've been awful. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try. I listened to it once, then deleted it. Not because I hated her, but because forgiveness doesn't mean stepping back into the same role you've been trapped in. Forgiveness, I realized, is about freeing yourself, not excusing someone else. Mom came by the following Sunday with a casserole, her way of smoothing over conflicts. She placed it on the counter, her eyes avoiding mine. Your father thinks we should all sit down together, talk this through. I shook my head gently. Mom, I love you, but talking only matters if people are ready to listen. And right now, I need space from all of you. I need to rebuild myself before I let anyone else back in. She looked hurt, but she nodded. Maybe for the first time, she understood. The days that followed weren't easy. There were moments I felt guilty, moments I wondered if I had gone too far by cutting them off. But every time I opened a bill and saw my own name, every time I tightened a bolt or repaired a furnace for a stranger who thanked me with genuine gratitude, I remembered why I had made the choice. Respect is not optional. Family doesn't get a pass to erase it. One evening, I drove past my parents' house. The windows glowed warmly, shadows moving across the curtains. I imagined Melissa inside, maybe helping set the table, maybe trying to piece together the image of a family she thought she could control. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel left out. I felt free. They could have their picture-perfect dinners. I had something better: the truth. What I learned through all of this is simple. You cannot build love on the foundation of shame. You cannot measure a person's worth by their clothes, their job title, or the dirt on their hands. True family, true respect, is about standing by someone not when they shine, but when they struggle. Melissa never understood that, and maybe she never will. But I do, and that knowledge is enough to carry me forward. If you've ever been in my shoes, overlooked, dismissed, taken for granted, I hope my story reminds you of something important. You don't have to keep carrying people who refuse to see your value. Setting the weight down doesn't mean you failed them. It means you've chosen yourself, and that choice is powerful. I don't know what the future holds for me and Melissa, or even for my parents. Maybe one day we'll sit at the same table again. Maybe not. But if we do, it will be because they finally see me for who I am, not for what I can give them. Until then, I'll keep working, keep living, and keep building a life on respect that comes from within. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If stories like mine resonate with you, if you've ever faced moments where family tested your strength and self-worth, consider subscribing. There are more stories to tell, more lessons to share, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find a piece of your own story in mine.